Hello everyone, today I'll be teaching you how to build a PC from scratch. When building your PC, you're going to need 6 main parts. You're going to need your hard drive, your processor, your motherboard, your RAM, your power supply, and your case. For this build, we'll be using a GPU or graphics card just so we can maximize the performance of our system. However, if you're building one at home, it's not absolutely necessary to have your computer run fine. The parts that I will be using for my system, which you could also use for yours, are shown right here. Firstly, let's talk about the CPU or Central Processing Unit. This is also known as a processor because its main function in the computer is it processes the data given from the program that it's running, and it tells every part in the computer what to do. So it's like the brain of the computer. Now let's talk about the motherboard. If the processor is like the brain of the computer, then the motherboard contains all the veins, which sends all the information from the processor to each component, telling it what to do. Now let's talk about RAM. RAM stands for Random Access Memory, and it is a type of volatile storage. What this means is that when the computer is turned on, it reads and writes all the data that it has to perform the given task given to it by the program. However, when the computer is turned off, that information is lost. Of course, when the computer is turned on again, that information is rewritten, so there's no real loss. But that's also why, when you don't have a lot of RAM, you try to execute a lot of tasks at the same time, your computer will begin to run more and more slowly. Now, let's talk about the hard drive. Now, as we know, RAM is volatile storage, meaning that once the computer is turned off, the storage on it is wiped. However, the hard drive is the opposite. It's involatile. This means that when the computer is turned off, anything stored on it continues to be stored on it. That's why the hard drive is where you store all your photos, your documents, your programs, and even where your operating system is, such as Windows, Mac OS, or Linux. Now let's talk about the power supply, or the PSU. This is like the heart of the computer, but instead of pumping blood to each part that needs it, it gives it the appropriate amount of energy by gaining the electricity from the wall outlet. Now when I say appropriate amount, I mean just the amount that the component needs, because an unreliable power supply may supply too much power and it would fry your components, causing you to need to buy a new one. We then have the GPU, or graphical processing unit. Now this is optional, your computer can run without it. However, if you have one, your graphics will run a lot better. What the graphical processing unit is a card with another chip or processor inside of it. But this one is only dedicated to processing graphics. By doing this, first of all, your graphics will run better as there's a chip dedicated to doing only that. And also it will allow your CPU to run faster as it does not have to focus on as many tasks. So overall, not only should your graphics run better, but your computer in general should be able to run faster and more smoothly, as the CPU has space freed up now, which it doesn't have to focus on the graphics. Finally, we have the case. Now, the case is useful to hold your components all in one place. Along with that, it gives you some useful things such as a power button and some cables that you would need to hook up to other parts in your computer. Before installing anything into the case itself, you're going to want to do as much as possible outside of the case. First thing you're going to want to do is put the motherboard onto its box so that there is no static electricity, and you're going to want to install the CPU. Installing your CPU into your motherboard is quite simple. Firstly, you will find a square more or less the size of your CPU on your motherboard, and that of course is a socket. Once you locate the socket, you'll notice a latch on one side of the socket. What you want to do is lift that latch. Once you've lifted it, carefully place in the CPU. What you'll notice is that on the CPU and on the socket there should be a triangle on one of the corners. Line those two corners up to make sure that it's the correct direction and place the CPU into the socket. Once you're sure that it is not moving very much and that it is stable, close the latch. It may give you a bit of force, but that is meant to be so that your CPU is secure. Now it is time to cool your CPU using the included CPU cooler that came in the box. You will find that there is a tab on either side of the CPU cooler, and the same goes for the motherboard. You will want to line these up and then slowly place the cooler on top of the processor. Once you have lined them up and placed each tab within each other so that they lock, you'll want to lock it in place using the retention arm on the side of the cooler. Now it is time to install your RAM into the motherboard. On one of the sides, you will see two things that look like tiny raceways called DIMM slots. Firstly, you will see two hinges on either side of each DIMM slot. You will want to open all of them. Then you will place one of the sticks of RAM into the slot by slowly placing it evenly into the middle and pushing hard until both hinges click in place. You will do the same thing for the other stick of RAM. Before screwing in your motherboard, first get the I/O shield, which came with the motherboard, and put it onto the I/O slot on the side of the PC case. Make sure to line this up in the correct direction so that once the motherboard is screwed in, it lines up with all of the I/O. Now it is time to install the motherboard into the case. In this motherboard, there are a total of 4 screws, one on each corner. You just line them up with the holes on your case, and you screw them in with the included screws. It is now time to plug in your GPU if you're using one in this system. If you are, then you must locate the PCIe x16 port on your motherboard. There will be a small hinge that you will move back as it is a safety lock for once it is installed. Then, once that is out of the way, plug in the GPU so that the slot matches the pins on the bottom of the GPU. Once you have it in firmly, then carefully slide the safety latch back into place. Make sure that everything is firm and that everything lines up with the case. As you can see, here we're using the 4 screws included with the case to screw the power supply into its designated area. Once you have installed your hard drive into your computer, use the SATA cable which came with your motherboard and attach it first to the motherboard's connector and then to the connector on the hard drive. Afterwards, take one of the SATA power connectors from the power supply and plug it into the other connection on the hard drive. It is now time to plug in all of your components to the computer case and to the power supply. First, you're going to want to power the motherboard. Locate the 24-pin connector as shown above and line it up with the 24-pin connector socket that you find on the motherboard at the top right. You will see that there's a little notch for the hook on the connector to go. Remember to line it up correctly. Once you have it, firmly push the pins into the socket. Keep pressing until you hear a click. Once you have that click, it means that it is connected. Now it is time to locate what will power your CPU. It'll be labeled CPU and they will be two 4-pin connectors. In this build, we only need one of them, so use that 4-pin connector and connect it to the female 4-pin connector on the motherboard. Like with the motherboard power cable, wait until you hear a click from the connector, meaning that you have connected it properly. Now we will be connecting the last cable from the power supply to the computer. We will take the PCIe cable from the power supply and we will connect it to the side connector of the GPU. As you can see in the image, there are 8 pins, however in this case our GPU only needs 6 pins. So we're just going to separate those 2 extra ones and connect the 6 pins. We have now finished plugging everything in from the power supply to PC components. So if that's all you're using, you're fine. However, given that we're using a case here, there are cables that you also need to plug in from the case. We will now plug in the USB 3.0 port from the case to the motherboard. Locate the USB 3.0 cable coming from the case and plug it into the connector as shown in the photo above. As you can see, there's a little gap for a notch that the USB 3.0 connector has, so make sure those line up. As you can see to the right, it is also explained, but I'll explain to you as well, because these are the cables that connect to the rest of your case. As you can see on the top left, you have the negative next to positive power LEDs, which will power the LED indicating when the power is on. And next to it, you will plug in the power switch. This is what will turn on your computer as a whole when it is on. Now you'll need your HDD LED and your reset switch. The reset switch is obviously the button which resets your computer if you ever desire to do so. So on the bottom left of the connector, you want to put your HDD LED facing downwards so that it's visible. And then next to it, you want to place the reset switch. But here the lettering will be facing upwards towards the other cables so that you cannot see the lettering. The final cable that you are missing from the case is the 5-pin USB cable. There are a lot of USB connections on the motherboard, so you can just choose whichever one is most convenient either for cable management or for cable length and plug it in there. It should work fine. This of course is a USB 2.0 header at the front of the case. Hey guys, if you guys followed all of these steps, your computer should be hopefully running fine. As you can see, I went on the journey with you, and mine has been working fine, and it's actually what I'm editing on right now. If you guys enjoyed and if it helped you, please give me feedback below in the comments. Also, if there's anything you think I could improve on for next time, please also tell me below.